Thank you all for joining us so much for the second part of our panel discussion on institutional civic engagement requirements. I'm joined today by two panelists whose institutions have required civic engagement experiences and who themselves are involved in teaching and research on civic engagement. So on the panel today, we have Megan Goldberg, Assistant Professor of Politics at Cornell College, and Cadence Wilsey, Assistant Professor of Political Science at the College of New Jersey. I'm William Obrochta, Assistant Professor of Political Science at Texas Lutheran University and the Director of Professional Development for the APSA Civic Engagement section. If you missed it, we hosted another panel about what some of the details about the two panelists' civic engagement requirements are and how that interacted with their political science courses. Today, we're thinking about what the role of political science is as a leader with civic engagement programming more generally. And we're thinking about this panel as being valuable, particularly for faculty at institutions without these types of requirements, but that are hoping to further institutionalize civic engagement on campus and to think about, well, what's our role as faculty in political science in leading this effort or in integrating with current efforts that have gone on? So I guess this is going to be a really normative question to start out with, but the question is thinking about where students ideally should be introduced to civic engagement themes. Should it be in the political science classroom? Are we somehow uniquely gifted to do that introduction, or should it be better positioned elsewhere? Cadence, what are your thoughts on this?
That's a great question. Ideally, we're doing community and civic engagement the whole time in undergraduate learning, right? I think ideally there's some sort of meaningful first year experience that students are introduced to the importance of civic engagement right off the bat. And that's picked up throughout the rest of their undergraduate life, right? Through advanced coursework with community partners, through global learning and study abroad opportunities, through meaningful internships where they're allowed to explore careers in public service and community engagement, and in community-based research, if that's an option. So students can work with faculty on community-based research that is aligned with both academic research, but sort of giving back to the community around them. I can talk a little bit about how we do that, or we try to do that in the political science department at the College of New Jersey later on, but I'll turn it over to Megan.
Yes, so I think, my initial involvement in the civic engagement space at my own institution, in part, was like very selfish. I came here in the fall of 2019. We were in Iowa. The caucuses were like sort of in full swing, or the campaigns for them. And we had candidates coming to campus, and the political science department was really like not involved in that at all. And I was like, I'm sorry, like if Elizabeth Warren is in town, I would like to somehow be involved in this. And so that sort of started, that I sort of started working a little bit more with student organizations. And at the time, civic engagement was really living in our civic engagement office. And we had just, I talked in the other panel about the way in which we have these civic engagement requirements, but that's a fairly new curriculum for us. And that had sort of just started. And so that's sort of why I got involved initially. And, I think that if we as political scientists are sort of involved and engaged ourselves, especially locally, that we can be really sort of useful and important facilitators. But I also, I do think that it's great when other departments are also sort of participating. I think there are places that we can perhaps lend expertise and perhaps a little bit more expertise. In particular, there are things that I do in my classes of like really trying to get students familiar with just like the process of, if you're mad about something, like how do you contact your state legislator? What do you do when you register to vote, and how do you vote? And sort of just like lessening the anxiety around those procedures. But in terms of engaging substantively on policies that affect particular areas, that's where I think it is really important to sort of see civic engagement across the curriculum in lots of different departments, because, I can, again, help you navigate the process of writing your state legislator maybe, but I don't know anything about agricultural policy. And so for our folks that are interested in that, I'm not as helpful sort of substantively. And so that's what we've seen, I think, some really lucrative, not lucrative, but really rewarding and beneficial programs and experiences for students in other departments working with community partners. But that, again, is also supported institutionally by our Civic Engagement Office, who also helps build out those partnerships.
So I guess then the question is, both of y'all have talked about relationships a little bit with other departments and with civic engagement offices. I wonder how we draw the line about what is the civic engagement office's responsibility versus what is our responsibility as the political science department or faculty or student club responsibility. Like, is it we all are in the same pool collaborating on everything, or are there some elements that are better suited for different of those roles? Specifically, as many institutions have these offices of civic engagement. I don't know if either of you had thoughts on that kind of division.
I mean, this is sort of like an ongoing, what we're trying to figure out, in part because we had some reorganization on the staff side. But I had students working with me this summer. It was sort of technically a research experience, but it was really sort of just like a really good brainstorming session of all, like, me and 3 students. And often we were pulling in our civic engagement director to talk about, like, what will we do on campus? And I'll be honest, like, I'm probably taking on more responsibilities that perhaps used to be more on the staff side because we are understaffed in that area. And in terms of, like, get out the vote efforts, that matters a lot to me. And I do it in my coursework anyway. But we really spent a lot of time, they looked at a lot of other institutions, and there are institutions out there with really great sort of centers for democracy and other types of engagement that are these hybrids of academic departments and sort of student affairs offices and student groups. And so that's sort of the path that I think we're trying to chart. But there is it requires a lot of openness and collaboration and willingness to delegate and to perhaps take on work that is sort of like outside the scope of what you would normally do as a faculty member.
Yeah, I would agree. I think so I've worked, so I was affiliated with the Swearer Center at Brown University, which is a really amazing, I think, leader in the sort of community engaged space. And I found that the work that they did really well, that I also think that the Community Engaged Learning Institute at TCNJ does really well, is sort of maintaining relationships with community partners. Because as Megan just said, right, it's a lot to take on as a faculty member to build and sustain those relationships. And like, one of the most important things to me about having community engaged learning and civic engaged learning is considering that the relationship between the institution and the community is like non-exploitative, democratic, reciprocal, right? Their students are not sort of being sent out to learn and giving nothing back. And so I think that really is important to have someone who's sort of managing and facilitating those relationships and making sure that the college is reciprocating the benefits that the students are getting from these experiences and sort of managing that relationship, because it's a lot to put on the faculty to do that, right? The relationship management is a lot. So it's also it's a tall order for the community engaged learning institutes as well, but that seems like a really excellent place to sort of build and sustain those relationships so that they're meaningful and that they're equitable moving forward.
Yeah, and I will, sort of say one place that we sort of have divided the labor in some ways is that in terms of like building and maintaining relationships with community partners, to the extent that I do that, it's really with like the very the organizations that are sort of like explicitly related to like get out the vote and other sort of really just political organizations, and our civic engagement office that sort of frees her up to focus on other organizations too. And so that's one place we've sort of divided it. But I will say, sort of like also at the institutional level, the reason I can do this is that the institution values it. And so if it wasn't something that I could write about when I'm up for tenure next year, like the trade-off would be very different and it might look different. And so I think that's another place, we talked about in the other panel, the institutionalization of this, but an important part is the institution valuing the labor that faculty do on this. And so to the degree that like I can do that, it's because I'm at an institution that does that, and at an institution where faculty and faculty leadership are sort of continually pressuring the administration to continue their emphasis on that as well. And my department is also like incredibly supportive of that work. So that all like influences what I can do too.
And finding that balance, right, between what is the staffing in this office and what's their capability given that, and then what is our capability given how much value or emphasis is being placed is really important, right? A conversation we've had here is that we have student coordinators that are actually responsible for maintaining the relationships with certain student groups, as well as community partner groups, right? They're responsible for coordinating that through our service learning and servant leadership office, because it's only one person and she's also in charge of career development. And so that means that like our get out the vote effort needs to mean something different, but might be able to tie together, as there was some discussion, right? Our Move Texas organization is under a student leader who's from the Civic Center for Servant Leadership. And so there's some partnership or thought that's gone into what is that structure given the staffing that we have, right? How can we make that adjustment work and be meaningful in the best way possible? We've been mostly talking about this at the college and university level, right? But I know both of y'all have research that includes state and local politics as well as education policy. And as someone who teaches all the teachers at my institution, I'm thinking a lot about, well, and they're thinking a lot actually about what is the role of K through 12 teachers in introducing civic engagement ideas. What are the role of even at public institutions, state higher education boards in introducing or mandating civic engagement ideas? How do we fit as an institution of higher learning within all these existing structures where civic engagement could be, sometimes is, and sometimes isn't introduced? So maybe Cadence, as our public institution representative, you want to start on this. Where do we fit within this broader picture of civic engagement?
Yeah, so first of all, I'll say that teachers and administrators in K through 12 education have a lot on their plate. So I'm hesitant to ask them to take a bigger role in civic engagement. But of course, right, lots of students don't go on to higher education. So they need to know how to make their voice heard in a representative democracy for a representative democracy to work. So absolutely, I think there's a role for K through 12 in building out our students' understanding of the roles and responsibilities of democratic citizenship. I think it gets a little trickier, right, on how much we can expect teachers to do that, because they're doing so much already. Perhaps it's on political scientists to help figure out how we make political science and civic engagement accessible to high schoolers who are maybe not exposed to that, right? It's also a way of keeping the major alive, to have people understand what political science is and what civic engagement means. And then as a public institution, I certainly think it's our responsibility to focus on civic engagement. I think that's really reflected in the College of New Jersey's mission and our proximity to Trenton. A lot of our students go on to long careers in public service and are pretty active alumni. So I think that is a really natural part of the institution's ethos. And I think it is one of the things that made me most excited about this job, honestly. So I think, it's really important at public institutions that this is part of the mission, I think.
So I think that for a lot of liberal arts colleges, that civic engagement and sort of citizenship in general is part of the mission and sort of baked in, and because we see that as an important role of a liberal arts education. I do think, thinking about K through 12, we've talked about working with community partners, and one of our community partners is often our local school district. And obviously the education department works really closely with them, but we have the benefit of now, if I actually look out my office window, I can see the high school and the middle school and the elementary school right down the hill. And so what we're sort of thinking about for this fall is, in my class that's focused on sort of get out the vote efforts, is building out programming, perhaps in collaboration with the education department, but building out programming for at least high schoolers before they go to college, whether that's having sort of a mock election for them so they can practice filling out ballots, getting them registered to vote if they're eligible, and sort of like introducing them to the process. I think that in recognition that they do have a lot on their plate as K through 12 educators, right? What can we do that does add value? As you know, it's a small town and we want to be an important part of the community. And so that's one place where, I see that we can really do a lot to add value to our own community. So that's sort of where we see it. But again, that does take building relationships with the local schools, and that can be really difficult. It's probably easier in a small town where I've met most of the high school teachers. I know who the principal is because there's one coffee shop and I see them. But and so that's sort of a small town advantage, but that's one place where I see collaboration as well.
And that can start off in a very low level, right, with existing programs that happen at many schools, like mentoring or buddy programs, or collaborations that I've done in the past with students that are working in some first type of job atmosphere, and just bringing college students there, partnering alongside them, having that experience with them can then help promote further collaboration with that school district, right? Hey, you went into our existing program, we sent 50 buddies to go tutor this semester, as we often do. Then like what more could then be possible, right? So that can then help reduce the burden on those high school teachers who are like, oh, now I have to make a new program to work with the college or the institution, right? Being within that existing program, and then you can assess better the needs of that place and suggest, okay, I know we have all these constraints. Here's something where I think we can plug in and do something that's really beneficial that isn't, as y'all both said, taking away from the many obligations that our public school teachers and administrators have right now. So being willing, right, to be an active partner in that process is of course important. And I would just highlight, right, the word Lutheran in our middle name means really vocation. And so helping students understand what their vocation and what their calling is. And that means when they go out into the world, that they're thinking about their career, but then they're also being civically minded. And so even when we're talking to high school students or having that conversation, it's not, oh, the only place to get this civic engagement background or these types of things that are in college. Really, it's you can think about your life in a holistic way and think about being an engaged citizen as one of those many components. And certainly that's the kind of thinking that we try to, I think, go through a lot in this context. So we've talked a lot about where your institutions fit with these civic engagement related types of requirements. I guess I want you to imagine that you're like much of our audience and at an institution without maybe a lot of institutionalization related to civic engagement, not even specifically perhaps your requirements, but you're starting out at that institution that hasn't had a lot of infrastructure built up. And I was wondering, where's the first place you would start? What's the kind of thinking you have about where's the place to include civic engagement? How much do I stick my neck out and say, this is my corner, I want to get involved in this? We've had these conversations a lot with other panelists, but that's from a perspective without having this type of infrastructure already built up. So this is kind of like imagine you were at a different place, what things carry over and what lessons might be helpful for thinking about people in that position. Megan, do you want to start thinking about this?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the ways that it's institutionalized for us is that it's part of our core. I'm like very ingrained, our core curriculum, not our general education, but part of our core curriculum. So I don't necessarily advise that you start by proposing a redo of that. That was a many years long process, and that I luckily was not here for. I just came in when it started, and so that's really important. But that institutionalization is also on that did exist was the civic engagement office. And so I think that's a good place to start. Not every college has one, but even just the existence of that office has been really important, to just have a conversation with them. And I should have done that in my first year, and I didn't. I should have done it before I even started, to understand what their goals are, how they accomplish those goals, and where I can come in collaboration, because I think I was sort of trying to do my own thing at first, because I sort of thought that political science should be the natural home for this. And so I was, duplicating efforts, which at a small college is a horrible idea. We don't have enough people to duplicate efforts. But to sort of like build out, how can I be a collaborative partner on campus, and to work with that group. And it's been really great. I mean, because they have some budget that we don't. They're the ones who are paying for a software that we're going to use for Get Out the Vote efforts. That's like really exciting and cool. And our department didn't have the money to pay for that software. And so that's like a small story, but it's just sort of like going out and sort of trying to collaborate. And so that's like to sort of see what the existing efforts are. I think also coordinating with student groups, that can be really difficult. There's a lot of challenges in that, just in sort of and this is possibly true for civic engagement too. Our office has had quite a bit of turnover in my time. The student groups have also, especially during COVID, sort of all collapsed, especially the political groups, especially as like the caucuses are weird now. And so we've lost a lot of student groups and student organizations, but sort of like investigating what institutions do exist on your campus and sort of using that as a jumping off point, I think is probably where I would start if we didn't have the sort of like curriculum requirements that we have.
Yeah, I think those are all excellent ideas. And I'll add, or I'll pick up on one thing that Megan mentioned earlier. So selfishly, if you are starting someplace new at a new institution and you want to do something new and innovative, like introduce civic engagement in the curriculum, you should make sure you're going to be rewarded for that in your tenure and promotion, right? So this doesn't necessarily need to be institutional change, sort of depends, but at least at CCNJ, right, the departments make the expectations for promotion and tenure. And so pretty early on, actually, when I started, we were revising them, and I just added in a bullet that was like about community engaged learning, civic engagement, partnerships with the community, as being one way of showing like scholarly output and service. And because these relationships and collaborations are really time intensive and incredibly important, you should be rewarded for them. It should be part of your job and not just something you do on the side. So I think it should be something that the institution rewards, and ideally something that your department also really values, or you make a department value, right? And the Carnegie Foundation has done some research on this as well, and including service learning, community engagement, civic engagement in tenure and promotion guidelines is like one of the biggest hurdles in sort of instituting a community where civic engagement is the norm for faculty, because it's not really in the job requirements as they're expressly listed in most departments and colleges and universities' tenure and promotion guidelines. So sort of in addition to everything that Megan said, right, making sure it serves you in your career as a way of just respecting your time and the time it takes to invest in meaningful civic engagement with the community.
I guess I would give a shameless plug at this point to two things that the civic engagement section is trying to do. One, we've had a panel discussion on tenure and promotion guidelines from two perspectives, right? One is getting those guidelines changed, right? How to go about if you are a tenured faculty member and have some of that institutional power and agency, how do you have that conversation? And then two, if you're up for tenure, how do you sell the materials that you have within whatever guidelines you have, even if it's the traditional 3 teaching, research, and service ideas, how can you write about what you're doing to fit in clearly and carefully in one of those boxes, whichever box you need it to be a part of. And the second thing, right, is that we're working to develop a network of individuals who are willing to write letters related to your civic engagement work, be outside reviewers if that's necessary, if that's something that is going on, because as both of y'all said, in order for you to help institutionalize something, you need to be present. And if that presence is not rewarded, then you will not be there in order to follow that through. And so I guess the last question I wanted to think about is something about this variation, like we were talking about tenure requirements, which is how the institution and community size or location or resources factor in to how you think about civic engagement experiences. At a smaller place, in a smaller city, we're always thinking about how many people do I have reaching out to this community organization? Am I putting a burden on them? This is the one animal shelter. Everybody can't do a project on animals this semester, that type of situation. So I wondered if we could kind of wrap up by thinking about what is some of the variation that is important to take into account, both community-wise and institutional-wise, when you're thinking about incorporating civic engagement experiences. So Cadence, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I think that this is a really tricky issue. Figuring out how to create relationships that are reciprocal, democratic across community partner and institution, because there are, of course, power differentials there, no matter the size of your institution and the size of the town, right, or city or municipality. And so figuring out how to make those relationships sustainable and reciprocal, I think, is really of the utmost importance. And I think part of that is decentering the role of the college and the university, right? So this is not exactly about what the college or university can extract and give to the students. That's like inherently anti-civic engagement, in my opinion. It's about what the college and university can either partner with the community to do or give to the community. And I think that's sometimes where service learning and civic engagement can feel really like fake and rote, right? If it's just about the students getting something and not necessarily the students feeling like this is a real and meaningful thing that I'm doing. So sort of breaking down those town gown barriers are, I think, the most important thing. And this is where having someone who's maybe tracking those efforts to make sure, right, that we're not overburdening community partners, I think is really important, and that we're meeting their needs and having sort of frank conversations about like, what are you getting from this and what can we do to make this a meaningful experience for you?
Yeah, I think that's like I would echo all of that. It is really a challenge for us too, like overburdening, because we're in a small town. I mentioned, we have to often go out to cities, which Cedar Rapids and Iowa City are our closest, but Cedar Rapids also has multiple colleges, including a community college, and Iowa City has the University of Iowa. And so I don't want to say, and right, it is, you don't want to say that like all of our students are competing with each other for these experiences, because that's not like, again, that's sort of that extractive logic. But we do want to make sure that that's why our civic engagement office is really, really important as sort of like a gatekeeper to those community organizations, to make sure that we are doing a good job of maintaining those relationships. And so when you take on that community relationship building, like that is an important part of it. Is to sort of make sure. And so I'm often on the end where it's an organization who really is looking for someone. But that's not the case for all of our community partners, that they are like, we can only take one person and like help us find that one person, but that's it. And so I think that's really important. There are lots of benefits to being in a small town for us. And that's in part that I see just as a community member myself. And so I think one lesson too is that like being an engaged community member of the community that your college is in can be really, really beneficial. Because if I have a student who wants to work in some sort of like after school program with kids and has some like ideas about political programming, like my kids are in that after school program. And so like, we can make those connections really, really easily. And so that's one of the like very small towny benefits. And that I see the mayor of the town like probably once or twice a week, because it, again, like very small town. And so, you can sort of like be in all of these places and make these connections by being involved. And that's really, really nice. And one advantage if you are a faculty in a small town, that you can start to see these opportunities. But it does come with lots of constraints. And there are certain types of opportunities that we don't have that students have to sort of like go elsewhere to find. And then we run into all of the other issues of just, trying to get them off campus, and that can be definitely a challenge.
And of course, on the flip side of this, there's also potentially an element of reliance, right? Where the town or the community is relying on the university to produce something. In our case, I'm thinking about an event that we have that's a volunteer cleanup event. And in the newspaper, it specifically said one of our city council members said people were calling me weeks ahead to say, when is this happening? Where do I put my stuff? How do I do this, right? And then if we changed institutionally and said, well, that's no longer a priority for us, there's going to be half of the city of Seguin that has their items out on this time at this day because that relationship has been developed. So it kind of goes both ways in terms of not being extractive, but then once we've developed something, we now need to incorporate the community's needs in that decision about what do we continue it? How do we think about its learning objectives or outcomes? Because even if we may think the experience needs to be changed, they might be really dependent on that experience and their voice needs to be in that type of conversation. And so I think that ending thought about this integration and the relationship across the institution, the community partner, our teachers in K through 12, that's all an important takeaway from this panel is even if you're at a place that does not have civic engagement requirements, there are ways to think holistically and systematically about where you as a faculty member might fit within this system such that you can then be, of course, rewarded for what you need to do. But then you can also fit within an ecosystem of people all working on the same types of initiatives and help those initiatives be successful. So I want to thank you both so much for participating in this panel. And again, having a shameless plug for our previous panel about those institutional requirements. If you're really wanting to know what's being done at some great exemplars of civic engagement work, please be on the lookout for that panel. And thank you all so much for coming to participate.